Hey everybody, I'm Brady Forrest.
I'm Ryan Vinyard.
And I'm Renee DiResta.
And we wrote The Hardware Startup. So Renee and I have known each other a long time from back at O'Reilly. And Ryan and I worked together at Highway 1. And we kind of came together to create a book that helps hardware startups get to the next level. You know, if you want to do a hardware company, there are a lot of things you have to think about. The technology, the team, manufacturing, retail, and there's a lot more than these 300 pages cover, but we figured it was a good start. So Renee was really the one who started the book and had pretty much finished key portions of it, and then asked Ryan and I to join in for the last part. So, like, how did the book come about?
Sure. So when I was a VC previously. Now I work in supply chain, but before that I was a VC, and I got a lot of the same questions time and time again from companies that we were seeing, and they were really sort of basic things: lack of understanding of like when to build your brand, lack of understanding of how you were going to take the product to market. So even beyond the engineering side, which was really what I did not have any business writing about. But engineering, DFM, and the actual design of the product is one piece of it. But then there's also all of the business stuff that wraps around that. That really gets into how you sell your product, how you reach retailers, how you think about channel strategy. So the book came about largely because I had been answering the same questions kind of repeatedly, and so we thought, hey, we could probably, when I first got into venture, I actually had read Do More Faster and Be Smarter Than Your VC, and some of the great stuff that the Techstars guys had put out, and said, there really is nothing quite like that for hardware, so let's write it, and that was how we got this going.
And what was the most surprising thing that you learned while writing the book?
I had never heard of market development funds before writing the book. I did not know that when you are working with retailers, a large part of, you see things go on sale on Black Friday, they cut the prices by 40%. It had never occurred to me to wonder who takes that hit, who pays for that. It also did not occur to me that having your, if you're being sold at Toys R Us, having your toy put into their holiday circular is something that you pay for. I thought that was something that just, stores just do marketing, and I didn't realize that a lot of that was actually kind of a pay-to-play structure.
And just in case everyone watching hasn't already read the book, because it's a page turner, who does take the hit?
The company. The company, you the person producing the product takes the hit. Yeah, sometimes they will split with you if you are incredibly in demand, but otherwise you are taking that hit.
So the margins for a hardware company are just crazy expensive. The hardware startup is generally giving 50 points for a premium store with premium placement, so that clerks who don't know what your product is are selling it.
Yep. Which
is why a lot of companies really focus on their website first and retail later once they're more established. Yep. So Ryan, what was, we did a lot of case studies, you and I. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the best one for someone to start with if they're going to hop through the book?
I think there were a few good overviews. I think the case study with Bunny gave a good example. Bunny's a bit of a unique beast in the way that he approaches things. Bunny has relocated to Singapore to be close to Asian manufacturing, but I think he encouraged entrepreneurs to just look at, what's different, what's new, what do you need to learn about your manufacturing process? Do you need to be in Asia for that? Do you need to be local? How do you lower the risk in that? So I think that's just an interesting kind of, how to get your feet wet. And then I think also the Orion on-beep case study was a good one of going through the whole journey. So once you have the idea, once you know, what are the challenges, well, great. How long does it still take to get through all that? What do I do? What are the new challenges that arise throughout that? So I think the Orion one really showed the whole process.
Yeah, I was pretty amazed. I chatted a lot with Tim Mason, the CTO of Ringly, as presented, just about kind of working with Android and iOS and how different their security models are and how much that limits the functionality of the hardware, and how, something you wouldn't think of as much unless you're intimately familiar with these things is how the OS restricts the capabilities of your own product. So you can do more with Android than you can with iOS with this device and others. So Renee, how do you think the VC landscape has changed in the past year, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, so I think that there's been an interesting series of trends there. Crowdfunding, starting around maybe 4 years ago now, was a really great way. For a while, people were doing crowdfunding before they were doing VC funding. So they would go to crowdfunding as a way to prove out the concept, provide evidence of demand, say, look, I raised $1 million in a crowdfunding campaign, now you should give me venture dollars. We've actually seen that flip. I did a hardware by the numbers thing for this conference, which you can go download for free actually, where we actually look at the shift there, where now we see people doing venture funding as a way to get a small amount of capital for a crowdfunding raise, because they started to think about crowdfunding more as a marketing tool.
I see that too. Like I call it doing crowdfunding from a position of strength.
Yeah.
Because you want to have the best video, the best firms helping you. Like the team has been focused on the product.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily know how to market it.
Yeah. So I think that's been one big shift. I think another thing that we looked at in the trends report was the prevalence of B2B versus B2C hardware companies. For a long time, the press was really, B2C is a nice, natural story, because everyone can see themselves in the in the user. When you see something like Sproutling, you say, oh, I have a baby, that really resonates with me on a personal level. When you look at B2B hardware, you don't have that kind of emotional response. You don't see quite the same degree of coverage. You don't see it making waves in crowdfunding, because businesses aren't out there crowdfunding the products that their companies need. So it's also been interesting seeing the rise of VC. But interestingly though, VCs are looking for those companies, because they're saying there's more of a sustained revenue stream. There's more of a business model that's not just, I'm going to sell you this one thing at this one time. It becomes much more of a data play, or a SaaS type model with a hardware component. And so we see investors really looking for that, and you're starting to see as accelerators are accepting companies into their classes, finding these great top B2B companies is something that is really, starting to increase in the ecosystem.
Okay. So Ryan, you spoke yesterday on 2D versus 3D versus 4D prototyping, and we covered some of that in the prototyping chapter. Basically start off with the simplest methods of prototyping, move like foam or wood or clay, then move to something like MakerBot, 3D printing with Arduino, then move to your own custom boards and using CNC. Have you seen anything here at Solid that would change some of the methodologies you'd use?
I mean, I think that the 3D printing world is changing quickly, and I think that that's expediting prototyping. It hasn't impacted manufacturing as much, but back to Bunny again. He had a great quote in the book about the equations for manufacturing and prototyping are the same, just the variables are changing. So nothing massive has been completely invented. 3D printing has been around for the 80s. Just the time it takes, the cost has changed rapidly. So. I can't think of a good one example from the conference, but I think obviously, additive manufacturing and prototyping is the biggest thing to help people move faster.
Well, I thought the pop-up factory that David Craner developed with Formlabs and Seed Studios was pretty amazing. Do either of you did somebody have one of those?
I was
Toss it to me. It's this amazing RFID badge. They have a pick and place on site. So they're making the boards here, they assemble it with the battery, and then Formlabs is printing out these cases. And it's just, they talked about it last year, they couldn't quite make it happen, and then this year, they were able to do it, and at the front of the conference, they are actually making these things, which, you have to get the parts ahead of time, but to actually build out badges for all 1,500 people here is a pretty fantastic feat.
Yep.
And I think things like Carbon 3D, which was at the TED conference this year, is going to show how 3D printing and additive manufacturing can really start to move ahead, and Glowforge, which is subtractive, easy to use laser cutters, are going to start to make kind of small scale stuff like that more tenable and more accessible. Anybody have any questions while we're doing this? We're the authors of the hardware startup. All right.
So Brady, I guess I would have a question for you. Renee was talking about...
No fair. I'm clearly in the middle seat.
Renee was talking about B2B startups, and that's something we see at Highway 1 all the time as an accelerator. Are there particular markets or startups you're excited about in the B2B world, and what business models do you find most effective there?
Well, in general with B2B, it's all about recurring revenue, and very clearly how will you get the product in there and then be able to have a subscription and do add-on services. So you often have data plays and service plays. The problem that we see with a lot of B2B is, one, they have to prove out that they know that market and that they can find investors who are comfortable with their expertise in the market and will sit through the longer sales cycles. Because B2B, although there's higher return, it's not a flash in the pan, Kickstarter, I raised $10 million in one day. It's, I got a contract 9 months down the road, and then I got a great sales guy, and then I've got the right incentives, and I'm able to find those pain points and sell into it, and then I build up a great recurring revenue. So, we see that the B2B startups that really know the market, where the VCs are comfortable with that market, do well, and the other ones struggle. So the founders really have to explain and sell their expertise and educate investors on that space. Do you have anything to add on B2B?
I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
All right.
It's I think one of the things is in early days, also with B2B versus B2C, getting that press. A lot of the marketing piece of it, a lot of the PR is really geared towards selling a product to a reader, and so when you're doing a B2B marketing campaign, it's a little bit more challenging. So the early numbers don't necessarily look as good as what you'll see in B2C, because they have to have a sales team that's actually out there selling that device, and so we have seen that while VCs are really interested, there's also that kind of weird gap where the companies coming in don't necessarily have the sales data right up front. So.
Yeah. I was asked earlier today, what is one of the biggest pitfalls that we see it with Highway 1 with startups? And it's founder disputes. So it's really like when you're going in to start a company, be it a hardware startup or a software startup or any sort of startup, the disputes between the founders are the number one thing that causes problems and wastes time and ends up maybe perhaps ruining the company. In the last batch of Highway 1, we had 11 companies, we had 3 founders leave. And that's about average. And there's a great book that just came out from O'Reilly, the author's not here, but it's Dan Shapiro's The Hot Seat, that really kind of dives into this. And I almost think they're kind of like 2 books of the same color. If you're gonna do a hardware startup, I would, not to tout our horn too widely, but I've definitely read Dan's book. And then I would also find people that you worked with in the past, that you've stayed friends with, that you really respect, and you've already been through the stress of like a project, and you know how to resolve conflict, because conflict will arise, and it's all a matter of like how you deal with it. One of our best teams, Lully, went through StartX, and of course I love all my teams, but in the beginning of StartX, they actually have the founders meet with a therapist, and they learned about their different personality types and how they deal with conflict. And they still like have these specific meetings where they talk about issues and figure out how to resolve them so that things don't build up.
I think somebody wrote a TechCrunch article recently, like where they went to a marriage counselor. It was like 2 founders who did this. Yeah, I remember. And it's funny you mentioned Dan Shapiro. I once had a co-founder dump me by emailing me one of Dan Shapiro's blog posts, which blew my mind because Dan is a friend of mine, and so I immediately I was floored by this, of course, and so I forwarded to him, and I was like, "Your writing was just used in a letter dumping me." So that was a fortuitous breakup, but but yeah, people take these things very seriously.
So Ryan, if you're a young hardware startup, and let's say you came up with this like crazy contraption that you've done a pop-up factory here, so you've already conquered your local. And now everyone here at Solid wants like 1,000 of these, so it's like guaranteed 1.5 million of these. Like, how would you go to China? How would you go and like scale up? What would you do, Ryan?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess that's always the tricky middle ground.
Give us some 3-letter acronyms.
Some TLAs for you?
Yep.
So engineers love their TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. That's one where I would look at kind of middle ground processes. Like it's something to make 1,000 units, you don't want to injection mold. Injection mold, hard steel will give you 100,000 units. You don't want to sit there and wait for the 3D printer to crank it out, either FDM or SLA. That could take forever. So, that's one where I would look at the new processes. I would look at using a 3D printer for injection molding. That's something that's happening more and more. So, 3D print either the positive or the negative. If you're using urethane, you can do silicone casting to create more units. But I think something where, get a mold is the short answer.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's in urethane, whether that's in silicone, or whatever method, I would say, try to find those middle ground methods that are evolving quickly. Try to find a friendly vendor. I think it's one of those where, like anything, get 10 quotes. 5 of the quotes will come back, I have no idea what you're talking about. It can't be done. 2 of the quotes will come back really expensive. 1 guy will know exactly what you're getting at and he'll want to grow his capabilities with you. He'll want to learn from the crazy new thing the startup's doing. So find those friendly vendors and use that to help you ramp, and they'll learn from it as well.
And you'd probably go through a process called DFM or DFX, design for manufacturing, design for assembly, design for cost. So I mean, they've already done that here, but you would definitely look to cost down a product like this. And you'd find vendors that have done things like this in the past and look for those capabilities and try to make sure they could handle not just the manufacturing, but unless you're really going to build it out, also the logistics, the packaging, the shipping, the certification, and make sure that your ducks in a row before you really start to take your startup big. And you'll want to think, is there recurring revenue that goes along with this widget? Mr. Hart. So the question was, how do you source those 10 vendors? There's a website, Alibaba.com is a way to find 5 of them.
I think Tindy's tried to make some progress on this also, and then Seed Studios has a map of the marketplaces in Shenzhen if you physically get on a plane and go walk around. And yeah, I've found vendors on Alibaba before, and myself.
And you email them, and they usually have someone who can reply to email in English, and you go there.
Yeah, and in general, you start with Google and start going down the rabbit hole, see who's answering, see what makes sense, and find new processes.
And then if you have the type of business model where you might do VC, then there are certainly a lot of American representatives at PCH, which is owner of Highway 1, Flextronics, Foxconn, Jabil, there's Dragon Innovation. There are a lot of different companies that D2M that will help companies like our fledgling enterprise here at Solid go big or go home.
Yeah. We're getting the wrap it up note
and
from
we're
Sonia.
being pulled. Any last thoughts, Renee?
No, I mean, if you read the book and have any questions, we'd love to hear your feedback. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.